are so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Good evening, liberty defenders and members of the world, and followers of this wonderful show, Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. I am your host, Roderick Threets, and I appreciate y'all tuning in today. I hope y'all had a great Thanksgiving. I hope you had a great weekend. For a lot of folks, it was extended. Kids got the whole week off. I know a lot of places around the country, they got the week off, which is good. And the week was a great reflection into our families, and not to be critical, right, of them, but just think about now more than ever how important family really is. We've grown further and further apart due to technological advances, right? And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, right? But let's think about this from before technology. A lot of us that are, between ages of, let's say, 49 and 65, 70 years old, right? Remember a time where, you had to coordinate on telephone, rotary telephones, push dial phones, who's going where for dinner, right? And who's going to show up, right? And we all made sure we made it. We couldn't disappoint nobody. We made sure we made it because you couldn't put enough money in the payphone to disappoint people, right? We have to figure it out a way, even through technology, on how to draw our families back together. Because the tear down of the family structure in this country is detrimental to the survival of this country. There's something for everybody to think about, toss around ideas. Those of you that were here, again, welcome back to the moral compass. Why the minimal state is the only ethical state. We've spent the last 3 episodes building our ethical foundation, right? We talked about individual self-ownership, right, is the moral starting line. And the non-aggression axiom or non-aggression principle, right, being the only ethical rule, right? Tonight, everybody, we use this foundation to critique the expansive state, right? Arguing the fact that the maximum state is just not economically flawed, but morally corrosive, right? We will also explore in this episode the ethical failures that arise when government expands beyond its role as a night watchman, eroding personal responsibility, stifling genuine compassion, and corrupting the rule of law. Before we get started into part 1, make sure you've liked and subscribed to this channel. The schedule is at the top of the page on the banner. If you want to catch the other 3 shows that are part of the Torture Liberty Media Foundation Network. And welcome to all of those that are new here. I hope you stay around for a minute or 2 or 3 or 10 or forever. I don't know. I won't hold you hostage. I got handcuffs though that keep you nailed down. But anyway, Yeah, I appreciate y'all taking your time out of your evening to do so. For my folks down in Okeechobee, Florida, WRMI, I appreciate y'all 100%. Those y'all on public radio in Waycross, Georgia, Ware County, Clinch County, Camden County, Georgia, and also reach out over in the Davis County, Utah, and Salt Lake County, Utah, and Weber County. Appreciate y'all listening in this evening on the Buzz broadcast waves. So we're going to go ahead and get into this real quick. I won't hold you too long. I'll hold you one time for the dime. I won't overload you, but I'll make sure you have enough information to think about as you go about your weekdays, years ahead. So the first part of the moral corrosion of power, we have to talk about the erosion of personal responsibility. Okay, within that, the core moral failure of the Maxi-State being the big bloated bureaucracy, right? As we know it in the United States system, we use that as obviously we're going to contrast these things so we get folks get a good grip on what we're talking about, right? The current U.S. government, federal government, is the Maxi-State, and it's still forever creeping and crawling in many different directions and encroaching upon our lives and aggressing upon us in many different ways. All right. So that's when we're talking about the Maxi-State. That's what we're talking about, the government and its bureaucracy and its regulatory state and its administrative state, right? But the core moral failure of the Maxi-State is its systemic destruction of personal responsibility, right? When the state guarantees outcomes, it creates what I would call a moral hazard. Okay, and that moral hazard meaning the lack of incentive to guard against risk when one is protected from its consequences, right? So let's throw let's go with a financial example of this moral hazard, right? When we talk about massive corporations like Intel and let's take like Ford Motor, these huge corporations, right? That know that the government will bail them out because they're quote unquote too big to fail, right? Isn't that what we heard a famous president say? They're too big to fail, right? And they take on, they take on excessive and reckless risk, right? Now, the ethical state, right, should allow individuals and firms to face the full consequences of their actions, right? The Maxi-State itself socializes the risk while privatizing the reward, right? Let me add some. Let me add some contrast to that to give more clarity, right? And we're going to talk about U.S. financial regulation on a surface level, right, versus Minarchy, right? Because the current U.S. system, right, asserts that some institutions, like major banks, right, are too essential to fail. Let me repeat that: not too big to fail, but too essential to fail, right? Creating a guarantee funded by taxpayers, right? Now, the moral implication is that irresponsible risk takers are insulated from consequence. But in a minarchist state or a minarchist system, whatever you want to call it, right? The government would uphold contracts and protect against fraud, but would never use coercive collected tax dollars for bailouts, right? Because, in my opinion, the ethical price for failure must be borne by the individuals who took the risk. Now, let's talk. Let's go to the other side. Let's go to one other part of this, right? Let's talk about the moral, the welfare moral hazard, right? because we know our government likes to use the general welfare clause as this overreaching clause that's supposed to take care of the people. And, obviously it's been misinterpreted. We've talked about that before on here. We've talked about it on Southern Liberty, how the general welfare clause has been bastardized to mean something completely different than what it is today, right? But do understand the expansive and unconditional government guarantees regarding income, housing, and healthcare. While their intent is to be compassionate, it inadvertently severs the necessary link between choice and consequence, right? We just saw this exact thing happen, right, with SNAP benefits, didn't we? Because certain individuals in the system, no, I don't want people to get me wrong when I say this, right? We have the disabled in this country that are permanently disabled, right, for X, Y, and Z reason, right? You know what? We can support those folks, right? Because there's nothing to their own fault that put them in that situation, right? Or people, that may be chronically ill, right? Things of that nature. I get that. I want to talk about the able-bodied people that are sitting here, right? That ranted and raved over SNAP benefits, right? Oh, we're not going to get our SNAP benefits, or we're going to rob all these people and take their buggies and all this stuff, right? The government bailing these people out on SNAP every month is creating the dependency, right? These people will never understand the choices they make have consequences, whether it be a positive or negative consequence. And they can perpetually stay in the system because it's a safety net. It's a safe space for them for whatever reason, right? But that's where that's what the welfare moral hazard has created, right? Now let me add in another scenario into this outside of the SNAP benefits, right? Let's talk about Social Security a second, right? Right? The Social Security system always asserts that the government has a primary right and and responsibility to manage your retirement savings, right? This creates a moral hazard. Individuals who might otherwise save and invest wisely may rely solely on the minimum state mandated guarantee, right? This in particular undermines the moral duty of every adult to plan for their own future, right? Now, the ethical society must allow individuals to make their own choices and then hold them fully accountable for the outcomes of that, right? But the minarchist state argues that the responsibility for one's life is a moral duty. It is a moral duty because you have self-ownership, right? And the Maxi-State makes the duty optional. Excuse me, I had to get some water there real quick. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about the government, again, using the Social Security argument, right? The government tells you that they're using your labor, right? Because you own your labor. If you own your body, your body's your property, and you own it, and the government is telling you it has a right to extract your property away from you, aka, right, the money, your earnings from your labor to manage your retirement. Not you managing your own retirement, but they're going to manage your retirement for you because you are unable or unequipped to do so. Instead of educating the people on how to do that, they'll just take it from you and do it themselves. Mm-hmm. But the ethical and minarchist state the responsibility is yours because of self ownership. You have it's a moral duty, right? Let's talk about a second here the stifling of genuine compassion, right? Excuse me. The expansive state does not enhance morality, it displaces it. Let me repeat that again. The expansive state does not enhance morality, it displaces it. And that's like, Rod, geez, where are we even going with that? Because it makes sense, but you may not be able to put a finger on it, right? So let's put a couple fingers on it, right? Just a couple, right? Because we have to understand, by centralizing social welfare through compulsory taxation, the Maxi-State stifles genuine voluntary compassion, leading to the moral corrosion of charity. Think about that a minute, right? A lot of you have heard me say, even you folks on social media, you've heard me on TikTok say it out loud. You've heard me type it on X and Facebook. Y'all have heard me say it on Southern Liberty. You haven't even heard me say it on Chasing Life, Living in Minarchy, right? You've heard me say that government is amoral, right? Government is amoral. But again, right? The expansive state does not enhance morality. It displaces it and pushes it to the side, right? And then uses its own self-indignation, government, right, to fund social welfare through compulsory taxation, right? By that compulsory taxation looking like IRS in our current system coming to your door with guns, demanding you to prove that you paid the taxes, right? Not the fact that they have to prove, the burden of proof is on them to prove that you did it. The burden of proof is on you to show that you paid. Because they pulled your name out of a hat and pulled up your house with guns, right? But let's talk about this moral corrosion of charity, right? And when we do, we have to talk about the contrast between taxation and donation, right? Because we established in episode 3, right? A coerced tax payment, even if the funds go to a great cause, holds no moral virtue for the payer because it's done out of coercion, right? It's done out of fear, right? It's done out of fear of the state imposing its force upon you if you don't pay it, right? See, when the state takes over the vast majority of social needs, it replaces ethical action, which is which we denoted last episode, voluntary donation, with mere legal compliance or regulation, right? AKA paying taxes, right? This whole thing is also displaced local aid, right? Because we have to remember, in this country, in America alone, right? The United States historically has had a lot of genuine charity drives that really thrive at the local level through community, family, and mutual aid societies, right? But the Maxi-State centralizes this function, often leaving a what's the word I'm looking for? Massive impersonal bureaucracy to handle welfare. Let me put this in context for you, right? Put this in context. FEMA. FEMA, you heard all the horror stories, especially in the West North Carolina mountains, right? Down from Boone, North Carolina, all the way, all the way down into in the Asheville, down through there. Y'all remember it vividly. A couple years, just 2 years ago, right? Well, a year ago, right? Y'all remember this, right? The flooding, right? And FEMA was even caught down here in Florida, moving over people's homes that had Trump flags on them, right? You have FEMA blocking aid going to people that were stranded because of the washouts, right? Even the county sheriffs was helping FEMA neglect people, right? You heard about the stories where people would come to get their $700. It was just so impersonal. No, I'm sorry for your loss. Here's your $700. Get out our face. We heard the stories. This is what I'm talking about. When the Maxi-State centralizes local aid, right? But let's look at this again. We're going to go right to the conundrum, right, of the current U.S. system versus our ethical model, right? Because the U.S. system funnels trillions of dollars, trillions, into massive federal agencies to run programs like Medicaid and SNAP. This centralized model often, excuse me, results in high administrative overhead, right? Some programs spend significant portions of their budget on non-aid activities, right? Think about that. Their budget is to pay administrators and not actually help the people the agency is created to help, right? See, the moral failure is that people aren't being helped, but that the ethical opportunity for individuals to demonstrate genuine compassion. Obviously, right, we determined this was a voluntary act in episode 3 and a little bit earlier here, right, is minimized because they feel they've already paid their share through compulsory taxes. See, there's another thing that goes on here, right? It's the demoralization, right, that's happening in this instance too, right? See, the minimal state encourages moral agency by leaving the field of charity open for voluntary moral action, where efficiency is driven by competition through local charities. And we see this all the time, especially here in Florida when it comes to hurricane cleanup, right? A lot of a lot of you that have been with me for years know I have a crew of about 5 or 6 of us every hurricane season on standby, and we, I'll do the donation drives on here, on TikTok or whatever, and collect donations for these people, and I take it to them. Right. We get the backhoes out, excavators out, swimming gear out, what have you, and we'll go, we'll help dig people out of their homes, help them get out if they're flooded, whatever. Right. I mean, we even got our permit. This was 2 years ago. We got a permit 2 years ago to actually start raising houses, right? Because we had that issue during Ian, where the houses have been so cut off we couldn't get to. Black mold had started getting into the homes because these homes were virtually underwater up to the rooftops on a sterile island. So we ended up getting a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to raise houses, that were, because you can't rebuild on that, right? So we did a lot of that stuff, demo stuff too, right? And when you have people like the crews, that we have out there, and I met a couple great crews, 4 or 5 of us, different crews out there. We was out there getting after it. You know what I mean? Because we know if we had to wait on the Army Corps of Engineers, because it was on an island, there's a preserve at the end of the island, right? So we had to go through Army Corps of Engineers. We know we had a job to do, but we know we had to, we know if the bureaucratic red tape would have stayed there, those people would have never been helped, right? So to my point, right, the voluntary moral action, right, in this instance, is always more efficient than the government, because we know, right, having to live through hurricanes year after year, living in areas that are, that easily flood, we know the terrain, we know where people are, we know where people could be. Just get out of our way. Right? You can't come down from Washington D.C. and tell us, well, you can't do that. No, shut up. If you scared, you stay up on the high ground. We're going down in here, right? Because people's lives are at stake down here, right? But this is why we need the government out of the way in these particular instances, right? Before I go on to part 3 of this, make sure, I hope you guys are engaging in the chat and all that good stuff. Make sure you're sharing it with your peeps, telling your peeps about it, share it on social media, the whole 9 thing. Remember the schedule for all the shows on the top banner on the channel page. I hope you come check those out, at the scheduled time throughout the week, et cetera, et cetera. And we're gonna get back to it. So we're gonna roll this out with the pretty bow on top, right? And this is where I wrap it all together. Everything we've talked about, right? The moral imperative for Minarchy, right, is the ultimate ethical case against the Maxi-State, right? Because we have to keep in mind, right, this case against the Maxi-State is not about failures to produce wealth. It's about its failure to uphold the most basic moral tenets of human interaction, right? The maximum state is morally corrosive because it erodes one, and the top of my head, I'm going to try to run these off real quick. It erodes responsibility by socializing risk and consequence. It stifles compassion by centralizing charity and replacing moral action with legal compliance and regulation. And it corrupts law by turning justice into a tool of regulation and special interest coercion. We see that now in the United States on a federal level, don't we? All of those, right? I can't state this enough. I'm going to close with this. The minimal state is the only, and I'll say it again for the people in the back that may not hear me, the minimal state is the only ethical, defensible structure because it recognizes its own moral limitations. It restricts its use of force only to upholding the self-ownership of individuals and enforcing the non-aggression axiom. By doing so, excuse me, it creates the moral space necessary for individuals to act autonomously, responsibly, and compassionately, making it the necessary moral imperative for human flourishing. Next time we tackle the argument that the state has an ethical duty to intervene for the citizens' own good in episode 6, which I have decided to call The Problem with Paternalism. Who knows best? I hope y'all enjoyed this episode this evening. I appreciate everybody that stopped by as always. New listeners, maybe old listeners coming back. My consistent listeners, I appreciate all you. I love all of you equally. Make sure you guys stay safe during this holiday season. And you know, I got to say what I always say. You got to love your neighbors, love your family. But ultimately, if you do not love yourself, you can't love anybody or anything else. Until next time, y'all. Peace and love.